Welcome everyone to our webinar today, Predictive Procurement as a Scaling Strategy, Case Studies from Successful Enterprise Transformations. We're so excited to have you with us today. If you have any questions throughout the session, please feel free to use the chat or the Q&A feature. Now I'm thrilled to hand it over to Kate from the Hackett group to kick things off. Kate, over to you.
Hello, everyone, and thank you, Kate, for the introduction. My name is Kate Denisova. I am a Senior Director at Procurement Executive Advisory Practice at the Hackett Group. And I'm really excited for today to talk through some of these exciting transformational activities and scaling strategies that we see procurement organizations deploying in the current environment. But before we jump into those specific examples, I really wanted to paint a picture around why is this important to drive that scalability and drive that automation and leverage tools for procurement professionals, especially in the current environment. I do want to kind of talk about a little bit about how important it is to understand what's currently happening in the world, in our environment, right? And to do so, I'm going to talk about the global context and a bit of the trends that we're seeing in procurement that is happening today, and that has been happening in the last 5 years, plus looking at the outlook for the future. I will also talk about how to mitigate these risks and volatilities that we're seeing in the market right now, we've seen in the last 5 years, and probably will be more to come as well. So we need to be prepared. And then one of the biggest issues that we've seen in procurement year over year is the bandwidth. Procurement has been under-resourced for years. So I do want to highlight this around how we're going to mitigate that risk. And then I will hand over to my friends at Arkestro and my friend Jim here, who will talk about how his procurement organization overcome this mitigation of bandwidth, mitigation of volatility, and really came up with successful outcomes. So really excited for this webinar. Again, Kate Denisova here from the Hackett Group, and if you're not familiar with us, we specialize in helping procurement organizations transform themselves into world-class capability through intellectual property, research, benchmarking, you name it. So again, welcome. So as promised, I want to take a step back and look at some of the global trends that we're seeing in procurement right now that are really going to change how we're thinking about procurement and how we do procurement in the daily basis. And really the top two drivers are around digital and Gen AI. So again, in the next 5 years, that is really going to change how we're operating. And at top of that, there's a huge trend and huge need for real-time data and insight visibility. So this is not a new concept. It's been around for years, if not decades. But the current environment and the world of volatility, uncertainty, and complexity is driving the need for those real-time data and insights. So in 5 years, we're going to see more and more procurement organizations having these capabilities in place. As I mentioned, the ability to address volatility, uncertainty, complexity, ambiguity, and that's the concept that people call VUCA world. Again, this VUCA world has been driving so much change in the last 5 years, and we're seeing in the future it's really going to be changing how we think about procurement day to day as well as in the future. So again, I started with some of the trends that are really changing the operations, how we do things, right? From Gen AI to need for insights to that constant volatility and the changes that are happening on a daily, weekly basis that we're just not keeping up. And we really need help with that. If we look at what is keeping up CPOs at night, right now, not a surprise. The top one is ensuring supply continuity while dealing with the tariffs, right? we're having significant shifts in the trade relations right now with the U.S. government. Everybody knows that procurement is working 24/7, right? This is kind of deja vu during pandemic and the shortages time. So we're seeing a similar type of workload, significant increase in the workload of what we're focusing on. So in terms of what do we do and how do we handle that? Well, from a broader strategic capability perspective, again, we need to have modern digital procurement landscape. We need to have modern tools that are beyond just kind of our traditional e-procurement application that we've been focusing on. So again, really driving that modernization because we simply don't have enough time or effort to do that. And analytics, insights. There's so much changes happening. We need to have the visibility in different markets, different locations, different commodities and geographies. So again, those are the top 3 CPO priority that we're seeing right now. So that was a bigger picture from the context perspective and the global view of the future focused in 5 years, as well as what's the top of mind of the CPOs. So again, one of the topics of this discussion is really around what are companies doing to mitigate tariffs. And we've developed a 3-step framework around how to go about it, right? And again, this is a significant amount of work that procurement organizations are that need to be doing right now and on top of their workload. So the first step that we're seeing is really around understanding what is happening. So you want to understand a macro view, the geopolitical impacts, the trade relations, right? What are the different power dynamics in the market that are changing? Again, you would leverage your market intelligence, you would leverage your news sourcing. So there's hundreds of different ways to collect those insights. You can leverage Hackett, you leverage other partners. Again, there's a ton of research that you would need to gather, right? You would analyze it also from volatility and shortages perspective, from inflation and deflation perspective. Different markets would have different things. Again, that is an analysis that needs to happen to understand the picture, right? And then you would create models, right? You would have different scenarios, and we'll talk about scenarios and how many scenarios organizations would have to plan for, right? And then once you've done that, right, you've done the data collection, understood the current state, and the volatility and the amount of changes and differences that you see in the market is just tremendous. You've done your analysis, and then only then you can start action planning, right? How are we going to go to market? We're going to do sourcing events. How are we going to negotiate? Is it a buyer's or seller's market? We're going to develop capabilities. So again, this is a big effort to do that, but it's a necessary steps that we have to do. And some of the tools that are available for procurement professionals to mitigate tariffs. And we did a study around what are the most popular tools and practices that organizations are deploying right now. The top ones are cost modeling, scenario modeling analysis, and I've described that. That is the multiple scenarios that you have to create, right? You're also reevaluating the supply chains. You're looking at the onshoring, reshoring, looking at different countries. You're creating specific supply chains to minimize tariffs. And you're not only doing it once, you would do it for multiple scenarios that you would anticipate. And again, think about it. And as you're listening, I think, you should be kind of thinking about, okay, well, how much workload is this, right? Am I doing this manually? A lot of times, yes. If you don't have tools that support that. Talking about multiplying the scenarios, right? So we've done a study around what procurement professionals thought around what type of scenarios we're going to have. And we've highlighted 4 broad scenarios. I'm sure if you do a detailed analysis for your particular supply chain, you probably will come up more, but for the purposes of this discussion, we just have more for here. So again, you're doing cost analysis for four major scenarios here, and 20% of respondents did think that we're going to end up at, let's say best case scenario, 20%, the golden age, right? So you're going to have to come up with TCO models, sourcing waves, and different types of supply chains for that scenario. So that's one. So let's look at the next one, the base case. So 40% of respondents indicated we're probably going to land somewhere there as well. So again, that's the next set of scenarios that you would have to do. The second two, the last two that we have in here are really more on a negative global reception proxy war. So again, once again, that's more scenarios that you would be planning. So, and I hope you're seeing now in terms of the amount of net new workload that we have to do in already kind of short-staffed environment. And again, from the scenario perspective, for each of different options, you're going to have 3 or 4 different sub-options of different moves that you would be making. So again, we're looking at the workload increase. So why are we talking about it? Well, because the key here is that for the last 5 years plus, procurement has been under-resourced. We had consistently been operating with less resources. So again, we are having flat or negative staffing. Our workload is increasing. When we have these VUCA events, our workload increases even more. So what do? Well, we've been spending 60% of our time on sourcing execution. So think about it. We're going to have to do more of these events to execute on the scenarios that we've planned already. So, and think each of the events will take anywhere between 12 business days to 40 to 90 business days, depending on complexity. So again, as you're thinking about your resources, all of that should be adding up. And for what? In terms of incremental planning, incremental savings that we're getting, right? Most organizations are getting roughly 4% from their sourcing execution events, from their RFXs. Only a handful organizations are getting roughly close to 8%. So again, we're spending a lot of time in preparation, scenario planning, a lot of our resources. Then we're spending countless days to get these marginal savings. So it is not sustainable. And there has to be something. We need procurement professionals really need help with their tools, with modernizing. And I really kind of wanted to have a dialogue with a friend, Jim here, to really understand how do we future-proof and what have they done in Jim's team, right? And Jim we'll talk about it a little more, how they've been short-staffed and short-resourced, but they were able to accomplish some tremendous results here. So with that said, Jim, I'll hand it over to you if you can share your story about how you've overcome these workload, staffing shortages, and got amazing results.
Sure,
so,
sure.
Jim.
Thank you. Can everyone hear me? Okay, very good. So, hey, Kate, thank you for teeing that up, and great presentation. Edmund, are the slides on? Can you everyone? I'll see you.
Yeah, perfect.
Okay, great. So, just a little introduction about myself. So, Jim Cuff, I'm the Director of Indirect Procurement for Crown, Cork, and Seal. I've been in the procurement world space for 20 plus years, and manufacturing probably closer to 30. Technical background, but mostly in the manufacturing regulated industry, heavy pharmaceuticals, some construction background, and currently with Crown, Cork, and Seal, we're in the packaging, but similar again, it's manufacturing space. So, over I would say the 20 years of my career, I've done direct, indirect, packaging, metals, chemicals, as well as MRO and CapEx, right? So a little bit of everything. So very familiar with it. But I would say my ultimate, or I guess career development, where I've taken, each company I work for is really developing teams, right? So coming in, usually it's a new process, new team, new executive leadership, and it's creating, a new, I would say, category of strategic management team. So I would say I'm on my fourth journey with Crown, and I was tasked really to, how do we look at, basically revitalize the indirect spend. Crown's a great longstanding company. Just a quick, minute on that. Been around for over 120, actually 130 years, based out of Philadelphia. Moved our corporate office recently to Tampa, but we are a global company. We have over 180 manufacturing locations, 25,000 people, and over a $12 billion, company in total revenue. So it's a great company. We're a packaging company, primarily focused around the beverage, right? The aluminum can. So that's what we are currently making today. So a lot of what I would say the challenges I've walked into is, it works. A lot of tenure, a lot of tribal knowledge. A lot of people on the team have been, throughout the company. Great culture, great people. But you're talking, people on the team 30, 40, 50 years of company tenure, which is I've personally I've never seen that before. And they're still working and they're still getting it done. But with that tribal knowledge, there was, a lot of it's up here and not necessarily on paper anymore, or the SOPs are old. So really, how do we add technology, into that, as well as, document the process again, bring it into, this century, so to speak, and really adjust or, accommodate for the people that are leaving, as well as the new workforce that's coming in that have different expectations of working with technology, especially in the sourcing world, where I would say, I feel like if you're not doing your data and not looking at it, you're behind the eight ball, so to speak, because that's the key to sourcing, is really understanding your data, regardless indirect or direct. So that's really where I started. And I would say my first step, or four main goals that I really focus on in any of the teams I build, I've been working on here, is really, the people in the process, which is consistent. There's always number one is price, right? What I call project pipeline, which is important. But the key that we really have been focusing on is, what's your technology, right? So what's your technology roadmap and what are you currently working with, and how do you improve it? And then, really your process, right? So how do you sort of redocument your process and your SOPs? So one of the, I'd say here on this, webinar, it's really talking around the technology, right? So I'm going to go to the next slide. So through the years, I worked with various e-sourcing platforms and different technologies, MRP systems and whatnot. So very familiar, longstanding, user of e-sourcing platforms, and actually Arkestro and, their prior, name as well, BitOps. So, used, Arkestro at several different locations. And one of the things that I'm excited about, just personally being a tech person, is the development of AI. I would say, if you look 7 years ago, 8 years ago, it was a buzzword. I think it's still a buzzword to a lot of people, although everyone knows it's in the workspace. They're asking, what does it really mean, right? Can you really see value from it, and put investment into it to see value? So the exciting part is, I would say, we're starting to finally see it. And I feel like, here with Crown, it's been very, I would say the executive team has been very receptive to implement that change. And it's been very exciting. So I think it's been, an exciting journey. So we implemented Arkestro a year ago. We're just actually going on our second year renewal. But the first year was a trial. And I would say a lot of people probably start with that question to the CFO, right? How do you justify e-sourcing, right, with AI versus maybe other platforms already currently have it? Or, well, I don't have many categories. I have long-standing existing relationships with our suppliers. We're just going to use email and spreadsheets and personal calls, and it works. I understand that. And that's usually the challenge I even get internally as we try to grow our usage of that within the platform. But I would say the success speaks for itself. So we focused on indirects in the first year. And the biggest thing that we see is, it's a small team, that I'm working with. It's 2-3 people. It's a large category of spend, over hundreds of millions of dollars. And it's like, how do we touch as much as we can to sort of get back to the basic 80-20 rule, the big commodities, which we worked on in the first year, as quickly as possible. So in the first year, we did 20 plus events with 2 people, in addition to setting up the new team, hiring new people, doing site visits, just learning the company. And I would say it's probably a 5x productivity just on the volume of bids we got out. If I know personally, if I'm just doing bids, I would say the old way, so to speak, email and spreadsheets. At most, I'm going to do 1 a month, and maybe work on the next one for the next month and then negotiate and all that. So you're maybe doing 6 a year personally. Here, we right now I'm looking at, we have over 30 events in there. So with just 2 people. So it's just a force multiplier, which I think is a huge, that alone is worth it, right? We can get things out there. I've built trust with the system and with the Arkestro team working through the AI that I know it works, as well as we got very positive feedback from our suppliers, using it and making sure they feel, I would say, comfortable, right? That they're not, put off by the events and the bids and using a new tool. It's been very easy and very successful from that. So productivity is huge. Savings, right? It comes down to price. So one, the trusting the tool to negotiate on itself. I've done this now for multiple years. So at first I was definitely skeptical, but now I just trust it. I put bids out there, and I'm not going to say hard numbers, but I'd say typically on most categories, especially if you haven't touched them, we're seeing double-digit savings. So I think that's been it's been great. So I'm excited to get as many categories and bids, even small bids, into the tool. So that's really a big focus of what we're doing now this year. So yeah, our average savings is definitely 25% over what I would say a traditional, bid was, right? So again, closer to that double digit. And to Katie's presentation earlier, productivity, we have a lean team, and then the world-class savings, I'd say we're definitely surpassing that even today for the indirect spend. And then the time, the tool keeps good track of time. It keeps everyone on schedule, where you could sort of, once we get it out there, I feel like I got 2 weeks back of my life, so to speak, to work on the whatever else fires that pop up. And I know usually the last 3 or 4 days, and then the chat messages that come in, I know in 14 days my bid's going to be done, which has been very powerful. When I say done, I mean, typically, I would say on a traditional e-sourcing platform or even manually, my work was starting at the end of the bid, right? Where the data is coming in, and now you really got to crunch it, do second negotiations during those 2 weeks, and then the final negotiation. Here, I know I would say 80+% of the lifting is done at those 2 weeks, where I can start to make a decision, maybe, sort of let other people down and really start to focus on, here's the deal, communicate it internally, that's successful. And, we move forward with it. And that's where our success has been very huge. And I would say our other, collaborators in our team outside of sourcing actually have seen it or even starting to ask about it. So I think overall, we've had a lot of success, excited about I would say, that AI negotiation piece. And I think what we're looking to do more of, which I really enjoy working with, Ben and Arkestro here, is I would say the intelligence and what's next of the technology, right? Because I think you have to think outside the box when you look at, this is an e-sourcing platform. I don't see it as that. I see it as access to AI, it's data intelligence, and then more importantly, it's a communication tool. So we are constantly challenging Arkestro to see, how do we communicate with our suppliers better? And it's not just about the bids. How many times do you communicate with your suppliers about price lists, commodity updates, index pricing, rebate schedules, or rebate acknowledgements? Those are all things that, and we get those from multiple sources, right? Email, Teams, manual spreadsheets, PDFs that people have to upload, you dump on your share drive, or multiple sources. And then your team, I'm working with 40 locations, they all have different platforms to access that. No one's seeing it at the same time. No one looks up their price list consistently. No one updates their PO accurately, right? As consistently as we can. So I think those to me are the next steps that I'm really excited where hopefully a tool like Arkestro, I see the way to communicate with our suppliers. It's such an easy scale. Really, the sky's the limit, I think. So I'm looking at it as a scalable supplier communication portal or dashboard. That's my ultimate goal. with it. So I know, Ben, I threw a lot out there for you, a lot of commitments for technology, but they've been very great, and we're seeing some of those things they implement very quickly. So I've been excited about the in addition to turn time of some of these updates. In some cases, it's days and weeks that they do updates if there's any fixes or things like that.
Well, Jim, thanks so much for sharing that. It's really been an incredible journey working with you and the Crown team, and we couldn't be more excited to see how you've scaled usage of the platform and really the benefits of fast events. We live, as Kate and the Hackett team mentioned, in turbulent times. So the ability to do simply more events faster per head count, I think represents a significant I mean, we think of it as a bulwark against,
Yeah.
again, the volatility that we see in the market. People can't necessarily always respond to tariffs and do their day job and hit their targets and. And so the
Correct.
more that we can offer productivity increases, that I think is a benefit not just to Crown, but really to the procurement profession. So
Edmund, just one quick question, comment to that. So productivity to me, that's what we use as our justification to buy the tool. You're not going to grow your team. You're not going to add headcount. That's where you go. And then the savings are your goals, right? And then everything else is just, the icing on top. And then what else can you add? So go ahead, Evan.
no, I think that's a great point because we do hear a lot of talk about, okay, how do we make the case? What tools do we use to put that case together? And I think for anyone on the webinar who's interested in AI, who's looking for leverage, what Jim just said about productivity and saying, how can we make the best people that we have, how can we make their time more valuable in terms of the impact? That's 100%. I've seen that be a very successful strategy because it's not to say that AI is trading off with the time that a human is going to spend doing procurement. It's actually that procurement time is so valuable, we can't waste it on tasks like moving PDFs and spreadsheets from one system to another. And so with that, I do want to dive into a little bit about how Arkestro works, introduce Arkestro to those that aren't familiar with it, and then we're going to talk about our point of view on some of the things that Kate mentioned about tariff adaptation strategies. So first, allow me to introduce myself. My name is Edmund Zager, and I'm the founder and chief strategy officer at Arkestro. And Arkestro is a leading predictive procurement platform. We simulate procurement activities before they begin, and then reverse engineer optimal steps to achieve desirable outcomes. And a little bit about our DNA as a company. We are a combination of the original Ariba team, leading procurement domain experts, and specialists in artificial intelligence who've come together to build this company for the procurement profession. And we focus on the most complex procurement out there, large enterprise manufacturing, both direct and indirect. Now, I can also show you some bona fides. We've been named a cool vendor by Gartner. Spend Matters considers us a value leader. And the real how it works, the secret sauce, is really about the three sciences. And we call these the three sciences of predictive procurement. First is around negotiation science. And this is around knowing what the outcome should be before supplier communication is initiated. That's really where the simulation technology comes in, and it allows fact-based negotiation to scale for every line item you buy. Second is supplier science, and this is about not just supplier recommendations and dynamic engagement, but it's about understanding the competitive landscape within your supply base. And I'm going to say one term at this point, which I would say is the most relevant term from Arkestro for tariffs. And I'm going to say this term like 5 times throughout this presentation, but I would say if there's one term you take away from me, it's this. incumbent alternatives. Incumbent alternatives. And what an incumbent alternative is a supplier you're already doing business with. You already onboarded them, they've gone through vetting and compliance, but you are not buying the thing that you need to buy now from them. We often hear that companies are single source or sole source, but there's a big difference. If you're single source, you might only be currently buying from one supplier, but it doesn't mean you couldn't buy from multiple suppliers or contract with them. And that's really important. We'll cover that when we talk about tariff adaptation. And then finally, process science. This is where the ability to live in our suppliers' inboxes is really important. Suppliers don't want another portal. A lot of people are sick of too many tools, too many screens to deal with. The ability to allow suppliers to get their work done in a simple email-based workflow with some enhancements where they can link into an app very smoothly, like DocuSign, we see that as a huge advantage. And then the ability to create the data in advance, that's tremendous. So in Arkestro, the supplier receives an offer from procurement. And that's a really important difference from traditional e-sourcing or even traditional buying platforms, where traditionally suppliers create the quotes. In Arkestro, AI creates the quotes. We think of that as like TSA pre-check. When we're creating the quotes, we're creating something that's approvable, and the supplier is incentivized to make an offer that is better than the offer that the AI has generated. So let's dive in a little bit further into how it works. We have an incredibly unique data set that enables real-time quote benchmarking. This includes item-level quote offer data, and it's parametricized by volume. We know, by the way, that volume changes the price. That's one of the issues with traditional cost models. And so, as Kate observed, one of the top ways people are dealing with tariffs is through cost models. Well, you can think of the way that Arkestro's AI approaches pricing as a new way of cost modeling, but it's embedded within the process of collecting and comparing quotes. We also can ingest any available POs, invoices, contracts, receipts, catalogs, but that's not necessary for Arkestro's simulation to run. We also generate metadata, and this is around how suppliers respond to procurement quoting communication. We also have external firmographic supplier data. This is data about the suppliers you're doing business with that we add to their profiles. And then we're tracking external market data, benchmarks like commodity indexes and macros. And that's why it allows us to enable this game theoretic, behaviorally optimal negotiation. So 30 years of negotiation science has shown that naming your price creates leverage in procurement negotiations. In fact, we know this as procurement professionals, that sales reps at many suppliers are trained to anchor high. They give a higher price than what they ultimately want because they anticipate being negotiated down to some degree. And in fact, this was studied specifically in a 2001 study by Galinsky and Musweiler, who found that over half of the variance in outcomes of simulated price negotiations could simply be explained by who went first in the negotiation. That is astonishing. And if you think about how the traditional request for quote process is structured, procurement always goes second, which means procurement is always reacting to offers that suppliers are creating, oftentimes making mistakes in the process or adding complexity to make it harder for procurement to negotiate. Well, that is creating more work at exactly the wrong place in the process for procurement to be able to adapt to changing circumstances. And so we've actually A/B tested this at scale. So we've shown that for the same items with the same suppliers, in general, Hackett's benchmark is correct. Procurement on average gets a little bit above 4% savings. And this is typical. We've studied this, again, across a huge range of customers, a huge range of items. However, when you introduce just the construct of a suggested offer generated by AI, that savings result more than doubles on a per event basis. And this is consistent with the results that we've seen at Crown, Cork, and Seal, as well as across our customer base, including in many different industries, from oil and gas to life sciences, automotive, and a huge range of enterprise manufacturing, facilities management, and other use cases. And so now let's dive into what this means for your team for tariffs. So in looking at how cost models are actually being implemented by procurement teams at large enterprises, especially those involved with manufacturing or distribution, we have identified the 5 most effective tariff adaptation strategies. And these 5 strategies are proven out based on the data that we've seen at customers. So we're sharing this as a tool for anyone who's interested in adapting to tariffs to take back to their organization. And I told you I'd say this term a lot, so I'm going to say it a lot on this slide. Incumbent alternatives. Incumbent alternatives. An incumbent alternative is a supplier you're already doing business with, but for a different item. If you are doing business with a large distributor and you're only buying PPE from them, they have thousands of other categories, which means you might be single sourced for another part, but that distributor could offer an alternative. And that matters when prices are changing because of tariffs. So think of incumbent alternatives as an AI-driven way to instantly generate a plan B, C, or D. It's kind of like in a phone tree, when you call someone and they don't pick up, it goes to the next number. That's essentially what Arkestro's AI is enabling, so that when you actually want to bring something to market because you're getting hit with a tariff or a price increase and you want to find alternatives, this AI model can generate the contact details of which supplier you should reach out to. And that is part of what powers some of the AI around suggested offers for resourcing events. So resourcing events are an incredibly effective way to give your stakeholders options when tariffs come in. It also comes in from spot buying. So if a supplier says lead times have gone up because of tariffs or I'm out of inventory, then that spot buy can then again be instantly pivoted to an incumbent alternative, someone you're already doing business with, but not for the item that is being requested by the stakeholders. We've also found ways to help you with Incoterms. Incoterms are ways that companies and suppliers determine who's paying the tariff. And if you have DAP Incoterms, it's possible that your procurement organization is on the hook to actually cut the check to customs. So in those cases, doing a negotiation around splitting the tariff with your suppliers or adjusting those Incoterms can be a powerful tool in adaptation. Finally, freight and logistics is an important piece of the puzzle when it comes to tariff adaptation. And in many cases, the annual contract for rate management simply doesn't cut the mustard anymore. Why? Because it's too long of a scale. If you have a bid process that lasts 3, 4, 5, 6 months, then by the time that process is over, the results are already obsolete. And nothing is more frustrating than putting a lot of work into creating a great agreement only to find out that that work now needs to be redone, at least for a subset of the lanes that are affected by tariffs. And so as a result, Arkestro enables companies that have progressive transportation management to have more frequent rate management cycles in specific geographies that are impacted by tariffs. And this is an adaptation strategy. It's very concrete. It's something that you can use today. By the way, I do want to point out all of these tariff adaptation strategies can be implemented with or without AI, but with AI, it is less work. And that is simply the difference, right? These are all process and people changes. However, they can be done almost instantaneously using artificial intelligence to recommend suppliers, create suggested offers, pre-propose Incoterms, and identify the lanes with high variance that you may want to do iterative progressive rate management. So that's really where these strategies and tools fit into any adaptation approach for tariffs, but AI can reduce the workload that teams have to do in order to implement these strategies. And so I want to refer you finally to a Harvard Business Review study that was conducted of Arkestro as well as some other AI solutions in the supply chain space that specifically look at what Kate Denisova called VUCA events, or these idea of volatility events, what happens when a disruption happens. And this study highlighted the role of incumbent alternatives. So it looked at our partnership with Koch Industries and it showed how our AI works. It looks at the SKUs. It associates those SKUs with groups of suppliers. It makes a prediction about which suppliers provide which SKUs. It generates supply options. And then that allows 60 to 90% of the time spent completing an RFQ to be reduced or even eliminated. And so this leads us now to our final note, which is Arkestro is not merely an e-sourcing tool. It is a vastly effective and robust data platform for storing and versioning the data that matters most. So not only can it shorten cycle times and create additional awareness, in some cases before your stakeholders even know they need something, it can help unblock requisitions, achieve quick cost savings, and manage price volatility. This is a product that we have in the field now called Arkestro Opportunity Intelligence. We're very, very excited about, and we're going to talk more about that with our CTO, Ben Lakin, who is going to dive into some of those use cases. The last thing I wanted to share is a specific example of one of these item recommendations. Again, using AI to dig into a market basket to find the items that you're buying where there might be an opportunity to use an alternative incumbent supplier and create some cost savings in the process. And this allows you to not merely execute the events that you've already identified, but to iteratively and progressively generate new ones. And ultimately, what we want procurement teams to feel empowered to do is see around corners, get involved earlier, and be bringing opportunities to their stakeholders to create value ahead of a potential volatility impact. And so with that, and a man who needs no introduction, I'd like to turn it over to our CTO, Ben Lakin.
Thanks, Edmund, and hey, everyone. Ben Lakin here, CTO of Arkestro. In just a moment here, I'm going to take over the screen share. Edmund, if you don't mind closing it down. And folks, what I've prepared for you here today is kind of a whistle-stop tour, if you will, of the Arkestro platform. I also call this version of the demo a cooking show demo, and that I'm going to kind of time shift around a little bit in some of these processes and speed things up here, since we've only got about 6 or 8 minutes to get through it all. But what I think you'll be excited about is you're going to see, either specific functionality or themes that Edmund, Jim, and Kate all brought up in their presentations, embodied in the Arkestro platform. And more than anything, as Edmund put it, we really see Arkestro as a tremendous force multiplier for procurement teams, and that's what we strive to be. So in here, we're taking a look at some demo data. Of course, none of this is real Crown data. We wouldn't show that. But we're looking at a version of Jim's account here over at Crown Holdings, and you can see I'm in this events area of the product. If you think of Arkestro and envision Arkestro as an agentic AI for procurement, agentic AI is one part execution and one part intelligence. And so this is really the execution portion of the platform. These are all events running in progress, spot buys, sourcing events, simple buys, and this is my administrative view. These events are coming in from demand signals, could be from an external system, think of ERP or a P2P, or they of course could be manually entered through an intake process. But where I really wanted to start out today is actually looking at some of the intelligence capabilities of the platform, and really showcasing some of the powerful functionality in the Arkestro platform that's making it possible for our customers to be really nimble and even proactive in the face of the ever growing mountain of work on their desks and the now almost insurmountable feeling amount of work and workload that is coming in the face of these tariffs. So the opportunities function of Arkestro, which you can see here, is really all about playing the role of the best possible procurement analyst assistant in the game. And what's notable is Arkestro, we are analyzing all of your historical data in the form of POs, as well as monitoring activity on the platform in real time to make very specific item level recommendations about proactive interventions and actions to take in your spend base. And so you can see a few examples here in the category of base chemicals. And to jump in a bit further, I'm going to zero in on one here that's specific to acetic acid. And really what this opportunity I'm looking at here is identifying is an opportunity to, in this case, save money by running a spot buy for acetic acid. A few notable things. Arkestro has identified, the historical price range. It's suggesting a recommended price to the buyer in this case. And it's also making that recommendation here in this purchase forecast section based on timing and based on historical purchasing history. So it's identified a pattern and is making a time-bound recommendation on the basis of that identified pattern. Here down below, what Arkestro is also doing is, to use the term Edmund throughout a few times in his presentation, it's suggesting some incumbent alternatives. So Arkestro knows my current suppliers, but here, as is increasingly the case in the face of tariffs, it's important that I have other suppliers I can consider who may not be subject to tariffs to supply me this good. And I'll draw your attention to one supplier in particular, whose experience I'm going to show you in just a few minutes later in the demo, DCL Resources, which Arkestro has identified based off of their past quoting history with Crown as a potential supplier to also sell or supply acetic acid. Last but not least, Arkestro will also identify opportunities to source or buy items together. In other words, to bundle items to maximize the outcome you're trying to drive, in this case, savings. And so you can see down here, that specific recommendation and the basis for it. And it suggested I procure both acetic acid and inorganic and ion at the same time. All I have to do as an end user to act on this recommendation is hit the create draft event button, and I'm off to the races. And so to show you what happens from here, I'm going to now shift gears and jump into the execution portion of the tool. Here, with just a single click, I'm able to stand up a simple purchasing event. All of the magic and all of the data that you saw on the previous in the previous recommendation is pulled forward. The suppliers that Arkestro suggested, the line items are flushed out, and Arkestro on top of that is going to take the baselines that we identified in the previous step and use those to create and generate a suggested offer, which is really Arkestro's bread and butter. What a suggested offer is it's a first offer price that Arkestro or the buyer presents to suppliers in the first round of negotiation for the supplier to react to. And what's notable about Arkestro is since we do this via a machine learning model, we're able to do it at scale for any line item you might be trying to buy, whether you've bought it before or not, I should mention. And for the or not piece of that sentence, we built a very powerful feature called the intelligent counteroffer that can actually go out and assess market baselines and current market context on your behalf and set an appropriate baseline, even for an item that you've never purchased before. So from here, I'm going to jump over to the supplier side because I want to show you what suppliers see when they go through the quoting experience with Arkestro. And here I'm starting out in the inbox of DCL Resources, of a DCL Resources supplier, and you can see that they've gotten a notification about the event. The actual quote sheet is attached. So one thing I'll highlight here is the supplier can both click the review your submission button to jump into the platform, but they can also submit their quote sheet via an Excel upload directly by email, which is a really powerful capability that we offer suppliers from an ease of use perspective. Now what we're looking at is the supplier's view of this event, this chemicals and solvents event that I've asked them to participate in. And a couple things to highlight here. Number one is that suggested price that I mentioned a few moments ago. This is that intelligent first offer price that the supplier sees in the first round of the negotiation and is asked to either accept, beat, or of course change and reject. And you can see here for this specific item, the supplier has chosen to meet it. And you can see the feedback. This is now an event, around in, and that supplier has gotten feedback that they're in the top two, that their quote is competitive. But in some cases where they've chosen to not meet the suggested offer price, like this item, this line item right below it, you can see that they're actually not quite as competitive currently. But, and this is really a notable feature of Arkestro, we're offering that supplier line item level, really detailed, approximate feedback on how to improve their offer to ultimately sharpen their pencil and have a shot at winning the business. And so this is all really, really powerful from certainly from a procurement perspective, but also from a supplier perspective in terms of speed, ease of use, and level of detail. So that concludes my whistle stop tour, but I do have one more thing to show you all, and it's specific to the use case around tariffs. We're continually iterating on the Arkestro platform, both on the intelligence capabilities as well as the execution capabilities. And one update we have coming in a future release landing this summer is functionality around total landed cost, tariffs, and advanced formula support. So just to give you wanted to give this group a glimpse into what that's going to look like. You can see that there's major enhancements to the quoting process from both the buyer experience and the supplier experience, as well as the level of detail that we offer both procurement teams and suppliers when it comes to evaluating the impact of, in this case, tariff rates. So with that, I'm going to wrap it here, but we'll thank you all for your time and attention, and we'll just close by saying if you have any more detailed questions or would like a more detailed demonstration to dive into anything that you just saw, we'd love to share it with you, and so just reach out to your Arkestro representative and we'll set that up. But thank you so much, everyone, and I'll pass it back, Kate, to you.
Thank you. Thank you, Ben. Well, thanks, everyone. Thank you, Jim, Edmund, and Ben for sharing your stories, how you're dealing with such a turbulent times that we're living in. Jim, your results were so incredibly powerful, and how you've demonstrated that you're outperforming digital world-class Hackett metrics. That's impressive. So again, and Edmund, thank you for sharing the science and the art behind your incredible tool. And Ben, thank you so much for the demo. Well, I would like to thank the participants as well. Again, thank you for joining. I hope that gives you a little bit of a hope that, yes, we're dealing with a lot of difficult times right now. We're overworked, overstaffed, but there are tools and tactics, whether it's technology-based or it might be manual, whatever it is, there's still ways to help mitigating them, right? So if you do need help with some of the technology questions, reach out to Ben, reach out to Edmund, reach out to Kate and Jim about his experience. If you have any questions about trends and what we're seeing in procurement environment and what the procurement leaders are saying, how they're dealing with these times, reach out to me as well. And thank you, everyone. Have a wonderful day.
Kate, thanks so much. And I think we do have time for a couple questions here. So I see we have some questions in the chat.
Perfect.
Let's answer a couple of them.
Yeah, I'd love to.
So I see that so some people are asking for slides. We'll handle any requests for slides in an email after the webinar. I see that someone asked, can this tool, we'll go bottom up. So can this tool work for purchasing, services, lab, and rates? Jim actually answered that question in the chat. Jim said, yes, I am currently doing temp labor, waste services, roofing contractors, and other facility services. Also can use for professional services like legal and I see that there's more there. So you can see that in the chat. The question above that says, is Arkestro negotiating every PO, even if there is a contract price in place? And I have an answer to that, but I think, Ben, you may want to elaborate.
Sure. Yeah, I'm happy to jump in there.
The short answer is no.
Right.
Have a pre-negotiated contract in place that you like, then Arkestro can help connect the dots as far as making sure that your systems where you actually cut POs are aware of that, and indeed can actually preempt that earlier in the process. But we're not going to do work that doesn't need to be done. Our goal is to take work that you're already doing and making it faster and easier to do. But Ben, do you want to add on to that?
No, not too much to add there, Edmund. Everything you said is absolutely true. I think, Tim, the intent with the opportunities functionality is that we're reflecting all of the appropriate business context into each of those recommendations. So certainly if something's on contract, we're going to take that into account. We may recommend, that you renegotiate the contract, of course. But if something has a contracted price that we think is competitive, Arkestro is not going to suggest changing that. But contract information, commodity index information, all of these other external factors, all of that is ultimately part of the recommendation context.
That's 100%. And the other thing I would say is that there are cases, it does happen in large enterprises where people get quotes for an item that is already on contract. And in that case, Arkestro is actually able to identify that as that process is underway rather than waiting for it to finish.
And Edmund, it's a very good question. So one of our next steps, which we've talked about just to touch on, I would also say, think of it the other way. Again, talking about scaling. More importantly, a lot of our tail spend and indirect is those individuals. Someone's buying a motor for $100 or $500. We're not, and if it's not on contract locally, the buyer's doing it. Just think of the time. My goal is to try to get Arkestro, and they have a new tool. I just saw, I don't know, the survey tool. We are the bid tool where you can upload a standard purchase request form. It'll just read it and create it. So it's a single source bid. Let's call it that. Instead of just going out to, say, supplier X to get a motor, which you would do anyway via email, do it through the tool. It challenges that person, the buyer, at least maybe just to give you a second look. Maybe you get another 10%, 3% off it. Either way, you're buying it. But those are the types of things we're looking to our next level to capture, because that's where you're going to get a lot of push from the tool that you don't have to do anything. And then the people locally that are just trying to get their job done and keep the manufacturing plant running, get some more scale and feel like they're doing something without with the time they don't have.
That's a great point, Jim. And yeah, I think in a lot of cases, especially with tail spend, we're seeing cases where there might not be a reference agreement in place, and we're just trying to get a very quick process done for the stakeholder that's out trying to get their job done. I see Joshua Flowers asked a question. Can you clarify the source of the historical price range? I'll give a quick line on that, and then Ben, if you want to add anything. So different companies have different ways of measuring savings. Some people use last price paid. Some people use a linear regression over a series of historical prices to determine an average and a median and so on. And the point that I would make is that understanding the context, like the volumes that the purchase occurred in historically, is actually really important to understanding which of those values are most relevant for benchmarking a current quote. And so what AI has been able to help us do is really understand that context at scale. So rather than just taking a kind of purchase price variance analysis and putting it over to generate that simulation, we're conducting a very detailed multi-attribute simulation that's actually generating a target range of possible outcomes, and then dialing into which part of that range is most likely. Ben, do you want to add on to that?
Yeah, and Josh, I think your question was specifically about the historical price range on the intelligence recommendations. That's typically, when this demo example is going to be based off of the company's PO history and their event history on Arkestro, but can of course be expanded to take into account other company level data sources.
The last thing I'll mention there is just that, historically procurement teams have segmented spend analysis and sourcing into different technology buckets, and that has unintentionally created a silo between those two data repositories. What we asked is, from a first principles standpoint, what data points can we use to benchmark a quote? And what we found is that actually quotes you've already collected are great benchmarking resources, even if you don't ultimately end up converting those into a transaction that shows up in a purchase order. And so companies, especially large enterprises, are sitting on a trove of data with the quotes that they've collected. They're just not putting those to work in decisioning and acting on new quotes. And so that's something that Arkestro enables large enterprises to do at scale is say, look, I got all these quotes in an RFQ or an RFP. Instead of throwing them away or letting them just sit around in some database, let's put that to work in improving and tuning a simulation so that when I get new quotes for that same market basket, I can actually understand whether or not my price is good compared to what's been offered through a legally binding offer process, as often quotes are. So with that, it looks like we've got through the questions. Thanks for staying with us a little over, and we'll catch you on the next episode. Take care,
Thank you,
everyone.
everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks,
everyone.
everyone.
Thanks,
Take care.
everyone. Bye-bye.